On Monday night, January 2nd, Damar Hamlin of the Buffalo Bills collapsed on the football field. The watching crowd was silent, and the announcers were stunned as CPR was administered. The announcers called a nation to prayer. On ESPN, one of them even bowed his head, closed his eyes, and led a prayer for the fallen player. In those moments, no one argued whether God existed or if he heard and answered prayer. See, there's been a whole lot written and said about the spiritual state in America. But that moment illustrated that when something is really wrong and answers are nowhere to be found, people still turn to God in prayer. And they should. And we should join with them and celebrate that there is still an awareness of God in our country. See, God's power to heal was on everybody's mind that night. There's a lot of questions about healing. Over the next few weeks, we're going to look at as many of them as I can. But before we start, I want to make a couple of things clear. Number one, there is no way I could answer every single question you've got about healing. Second thing is, I don't have all the answers. There are some things that I simply don't understand either. You know, when I was younger as a pastor, I felt pressure to know everything. And now that I'm older, I realize just how much I don't know. Listen, I am not the fount of all knowledge. I am still on the learning journey, and I will be until I die. When I don't know, I can promise you I will say I don't know, and we're going to learn to trust God together. I'm also not under the illusion that every answer will be popular or that you will unanimously agree with me. So before we start, let's concede that none of us have all the answers, right? We've got thoughts, ideas, beliefs, convictions, but we are not God. When you disagree with me, I ask for grace and patience. If you disagree with someone else, then offer that same grace and patience to them. We can have healthy conversations about faith. We can learn from each other, and we can all grow. All right, everybody understand the ground rules? All right, so let's get started. The first question is, how should I pray for people to be healed? Do we ask for healing, or do we, in the believer's authority, speak healing, rebuke illness, etc.? That has always confused me. See, we are Americans. We like predictable formulas. If you do this, then you get this. Save 15% of your income, and then you'll have enough money for retirement. Buy a house, sell it in 5 years for more than you paid. Get an entry-level job, work hard, be loyal to the company, and you will work your way to the top. Find the right person, date them for a while, get married, and live happily ever after. Read all the parenting books there are, send your kids to the best schools, make sure they've got the best stuff, and they'll grow into model citizens. Wear the right clothes, drive the right car, move to the right neighborhood, and you'll be accepted by all the right people. Take care of yourself. Eat right, exercise, sleep well, and you'll live a long, happy life. See, we want everything nice, neat, predictable, and packaged. If you make the right decision, you should get the right results. And if you make the wrong decision, then you deserve the crummy outcome. See, the formula works if you work it. But then life happens. You get sick, and you don't have the answers. And once again, people try to make that your fault. You didn't follow the right formula. You might have heard people say, well, if you haven't been healed because you don't have enough faith. If you haven't received a financial miracle, it's because you haven't given enough or done enough to qualify. If you're sick, it must be your fault. You need to examine your life. You must be doing something wrong. What have you done? What have you said? You know what? If you just say you're healed, you will be healed. Don't admit that you're sick and you won't be sick. Just have more faith. Is that really true? Can you confess your way in or out of healing? See, we've been taught to think that it's a formula. If you can get the right faith healer, if you can say the right prayer, if you can give the right offering, or if you can go to the right church or have the right amount of faith, if you can figure out the formula, then God will heal you. There is even a book that teaches you the right way to pray for people in any and every physical problem, where to place your hands and what to say in prayer. According to the author, if you don't pray the right way, it doesn't work. And I just picture God in heaven going, ooh, nice try, but you didn't quite get the words right. You know, you just missed it by this much. Your hand was off by like 3 centimeters, so I'm sorry. Keep trying and maybe I'll heal you. See, we're Americans. We like methods. We want to believe that if we say the right thing, pray the right thing, or push the right button, that it's automatic. But see, there is no one scriptural method for healing. When Lazarus died, Jesus waited 4 days, and then he called Lazarus to come out of the tomb. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus interrupted a funeral in a town called Nain and said to the young boy, he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And he did. In Luke 17, 10 men with leprosy yelled to Jesus, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." And when he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priest." And as they went, they were cleansed. In Mark chapter 1, Jesus encountered a leper. It said a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "And if you are willing, you can make me clean." See, that time, Jesus broke all convention and all the rules, and he touched him, and he was healed. In John chapter 9, Jesus made mud balls, and he put them on the eyes of a blind man. And when he washed off the mud, he could see. Could you imagine if I did that, if I spit in some dirt and made like a salve with it and then went to put it on your eyes? Y'all be like, "Yo, pastor, what you doing?" Right? But that's what Jesus did. It was unconventional. Are you getting the picture? There's not one formula or one method. There's not something specific that you have to do or something special you have to say in order to be healed. Listen, it's not about finding a prayer expert or being in the right place. Your healing is not based on what you do. Your healing is based on what God does, on His word and on His promises. See, you can't restrict Jesus to your system or your preference. You don't get to decide who qualifies for a miracle, and you can't decide how it happens. You can't put God inside your little box because He doesn't fit. The principles are consistent. The message is unchanging, but the methods change all the time. The way people pray or speak or rebuke or claim is based on how they were taught, what they experienced, or their tradition growing up. See, Jesus used different methods for different people with different needs. The frantic and sometimes foolish searching for the right formula. The attempts at bargaining with God or buttering Him up to a miracle should remind us of a very sobering fact. People all around us are suffering. They're hurting. And they're in desperate need of a touch from Jesus. The next question is, when it comes to healing, how much is up to me and how much of it is up to God? And in response to that question, we're going to look at two men in the New Testament. Each of them are in a desperate situation. Their only hope for a miracle was from Jesus. By studying their stories and Jesus' reaction side by side, you're going to discover some important things about miracles. And I hope it's going to relieve some pressure. Mark chapter 10 tells the story of Bartimaeus, a blind man that was desperate to see. In John chapter 5, we find the story of an invalid, a man who couldn't move and was desperate to walk. See, both men had a need. It's important to understand the culture in Bible times because these two guys were handicapped. They were regarded as worthless and a drain on society. People avoided and ignored the handicapped. It was a deep-seated, ugly prejudice. People believed the invalid couldn't walk and Bartimaeus couldn't see because God was punishing them. Their disability was viewed as a result of their sin. Both men had a need, and both men had a plan. Bartimaeus' plan was simple. When Jesus came by, Bartimaeus just planned to shout out and ask Jesus for healing. Now, the invalid, he had a bit of a more complex plan. He staked out at the pool of Bethesda, a crowded gathering place for the sick. People believed that an angel came and stirred the water, that the very first one to touch the water would be healed. And so when the water began to move in a mysterious way, there was a race to the pool. See, the invalid's plan was to jump in the pool at the very first ripple. There's just one slight flaw to his plan. He couldn't walk. He couldn't run to the pool. He couldn't jump in the water. It really wasn't much of a plan. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. Now, Bartimaeus couldn't get a job, but he did have some initiative. Every day, Bartimaeus got up as early as he could so he could get a good spot on the side of the road. And he spent the day begging, hoping that someone would have pity on him and give him a few small coins. See, it wasn't much, but at least Bartimaeus was doing something. The invalid, on the other hand, was doing absolutely nothing. He was lying on a mat by the pool day after day. He couldn't get up and run. He couldn't jump in the water. He's the picture of self-pity. I can't walk. I can't run. I'll just lay here until I die. He reminds me of Eeyore. See, Bartimaeus was doing everything he could. The invalid was doing nothing. Who are you like? Are you doing everything you know to do? Or are you like the invalid, feeling sorry for yourself and hoping that you'll catch a lucky break? Have you ever heard the verse, God helps those who help themselves? You ever heard that? It's a pretty good verse, isn't it? There's just one slight problem with that. It's not actually in the Bible. And it's only partly true. God does help people who help themselves. But God also helps people who can't help themselves. When Bartimaeus heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." See, we know from accounts in Scripture that Jesus always drew a crowd, a chance for a beggar to make serious money. But see, Bartimaeus was completely focused on Jesus. He kept yelling, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And it says that many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." See, Bartimaeus didn't worry about the crowd trying to quiet him. He ignored all the obstacles and he kept his focus on Jesus. The invalid, he did just the opposite. When Jesus saw him laying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me in the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Now, the invalid didn't even recognize Jesus. He just had all the excuses for why he couldn't get better. Someone was always faster. No one was around to throw him in the water. See, the helpless man's world was confined to a tiny mat on the stones surrounding the pool. See, Bartimaeus was Jesus-focused. The invalid was excuse-focused. Which one are you like? Are you focused on Jesus, or are you focused on your problems and your excuses for why you can't be healed? When Jesus heard Bartimaeus yelling, he stopped and said, "Call him." And so they called the blind man. "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. And Jesus asked him, "What do you want from me?" The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." See, Bartimaeus was full of hope. When Jesus asked what he wanted, Bartimaeus could have asked for money. He could have asked for a prime begging spot or even a new job. Instead, Bartimaeus went for the whole thing. He said, "I want to see." But when Jesus asked the invalid, "Do you want to get well?" the invalid replied, "Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. Poor, poor, pitiful me." For almost 4 decades, he had seen through the eyes of hopelessness. He was waiting for a healing that didn't come. He no longer believed that healing was possible. He was an excuse-making, no-chance-taking, hopeless case. What a big difference here. Bartimaeus was hopeful, while the invalid was hopeless. What about you? Are you hopeful? Or have you given up on your miracle? Jesus called Bartimaeus, said, throwing aside his cloak, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. See, when Jesus called, Bartimaeus followed the sound of his voice and he pressed through the crowd to Jesus. The invalid couldn't come to Jesus. He wasn't physically able. He wasn't able to approach Jesus, and so Jesus approached him. What a difference. Bartimaeus came to Jesus, but Jesus came to the invalid. In spite of all of their differences, both men had an encounter with Jesus. Jesus stopped for both the men, Bartimaeus, who was filled with hope, and the invalid who had no hope. The blind man shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And when Jesus came to Bartimaeus and asked what he wanted, he simply replied, "I want to see." See, somehow Bartimaeus knew who Jesus was. He addressed Jesus as Son of David, which is a term that means Messiah. See, Jesus had taught around the area where Bartimaeus lived. On one of those occasions, Bartimaeus must have been on the edge of the crowd and heard the life-giving words. Perhaps because he was blind, Bartimaeus listened better than the other people. Apparently, at some point, Bartimaeus made the decision that Jesus was more than a man, that he was the Son of God. Bartimaeus was a faith-filled believer in Jesus as the Son of God. The invalid, on the other hand, wasn't a believer. He wasn't a follower. He wasn't even a casual observer. Jesus was the most famous teacher of the day. He attracted attention and inspired controversy everywhere he went. But this guy sitting by the pool had never even heard of Jesus. He just called him Sir. Imagine all those sick people sitting around the pool waiting for a healing, not knowing that the healer himself was on the scene. The invalid couldn't have been a believer, or he'd have known who Jesus was. So if he wasn't a believer, there's no way he could have been healed by faith. And if he wasn't a believer, there's no way he could be healed, right? If he didn't even believe in Jesus, how could he do his part? How could he have any faith? What a huge difference. Bartimaeus was a believer. The invalid didn't even know who Jesus was. Verse 51 said, What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked him. And the blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. There was no hesitation, no doubt. He said, I want to see. See, when Jesus came to him, Bartimaeus was ready to receive. See, Bartimaeus knew what he wanted. He wanted healing. The invalid didn't even know what he needed. Jesus asked the invalid, do you want to get well? The invalid said, Sir, I've got no one to get me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to go down, someone else gets in before me. See, the invalid didn't even ask for healing. He was just looking for someone committed enough to stay next to him and throw him in the pool whenever it stirred, which, by the way, would have worked out terribly. The invalid was looking for natural answers when the supernatural answer was right in front of him. Comparing the two stories, we root for Bartimaeus, don't we? He deserved to be healed. And even though we feel bad for the invalid, we're kind of empathetic to him, or apathetic rather. It's like, See, for some of you, everything you believed about miracles and healing is about to be challenged. For others of you who have been condemned by others for not having enough faith, this is about to turn you upside down. Look at what happened next. First to Bartimaeus, Jesus said, Go, your faith has healed you. See, Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith. That must be the key. That's the secret. If you want to be healed, you've got to have great faith. There's a formula. It is up to you. God does help those who help themselves. But now the invalid. And Jesus said to him, Get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once the man was cured, and he picked up his mat and walked. Well, wait a second. If the key is faith, why in the world was the invalid healed? He didn't have any faith. He didn't even know who Jesus was. Nothing he did brought about his healing. When Jesus offered healing, the invalid wanted someone to throw him into the pool. I'm surprised that the invalid didn't say, you know what, forget it, I'm going to stay on my comfortable mat. See, Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith. The invalid wasn't healed because of his faith, but because of Jesus' compassion. Jesus said to Bartimaeus, Go, your faith has healed you. See, Bartimaeus was a believer before being healed. His faith was the key to healing. The invalid was not a believer before his healing. In fact, he didn't become a believer until sometime after his healing. His faith came as a result of his miracle. Now, that'll mess with your theology a bit. If you've always believed that healing was a result of faith, how in the world do you explain the healing of the invalid? There's only one possible explanation, and that's the love of God. See, God, in his love and his mercy, chose to reveal himself to the invalid by healing his sickness. And in just a few minutes, we're going to pray for healing. And if you don't know Jesus, I dare you to come forward for prayer. See, both men had an encounter with Jesus, and surprisingly, both received a miracle. Bartimaeus was healed because of his faith in Jesus. The invalid had faith in Jesus because he was healed. Makes me think of a lot of people that suffer with depression. It's rare that someone suffering from depression is filled with faith. Thank God it's not about you. Right? It's not about what you say. It's not about what you pray or what you do. See, he's God, not you. Now, let me caution a balance point. You could listen to that and say, well, Pastor Jason doesn't believe in faith. He doesn't think that faith makes a difference. Now, listen, if you say that, you're twisting my words and you're misrepresenting the truth. I am faith-filled. I believe in an all-powerful God who is able to do far and beyond what we can think, ask, or imagine. And Scripture's clear that faith is necessary for the follower of Jesus. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. At the same time, I am thankful that when my faith is weak, God is still able to heal. His miraculous power is unlimited, and he is not limited by your lack of faith. What happens next is amazing. Bartimaeus did exactly what you would think. He left his beggar tools behind and he followed Jesus. But look at what happened to the invalid. The day came on which this took place. Start over. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it's the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. So they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away from the crowd that was there. I can't imagine that. Put yourself in the invalid's place. You are crippled and you can't walk. You have lost all hope. You never had a chance to walk again. And then one day, a man walks up to you and heals you. Would you lose track of him in the crowd? I don't think so, right? You would grab onto Jesus with everything you had, determined to follow him forever. But not this guy. Many people, even though they've been touched by God and have experienced his love and his power, they lose sight of him in their crowded, busy life, just like the invalid did. And what you think should happen next is when the invalid didn't acknowledge Jesus, God went, you know what? Poof. And he made him crippled again. That's what I would think would happen. But not Jesus. Jesus, the Son of God, filled with incredible love, went to find the invalid again. So later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, see, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews it was Jesus who had made him well. See, Jesus wasn't just concerned with the invalid's physical condition, but his spiritual condition as well. Jesus' point was sobering. Sin has consequences far worse than sickness. 38 years as an invalid was nothing compared to an eternity in hell. See, both Bartimaeus and the invalid had the opportunity to become followers of Jesus. Bartimaeus chose to follow. We don't really know what decision the invalid made, but it appears that he also made the decision to become a follower because he returned to the Jews and he proclaimed that it was Jesus who healed him. So who does God help? Two categories of people. God helps those who can help themselves, like Bartimaeus, and God also helps those who can't help themselves, like the invalid. See, it's not about you, it's about him. It's not about the words you say, the faith you feel, or the things you do. That is all wonderful and good. But it's not about you. It's not about you finding the formula. It's about Jesus who loves you beyond all love. The lesson we learn from Bartimaeus is run to Jesus. See, people may try to discourage you. It may not seem like there's any hope, but you've got to run to Jesus. When hope is gone, run to Jesus. When the doctors don't have an answer, run to Jesus. When you don't know where to turn, run to Jesus. Don't let anything stop you. The lesson from the invalid? 38 years had passed. He was convinced that things would never get better. The invalid didn't deserve to be healed. He didn't exhibit any faith to warrant a response from Jesus. He didn't even know who Jesus was. In this case, rather than help those who can't help themselves, Jesus helped a helpless man. When everything around you fails, when friends or family aren't around to give you what you need, when your cries for help seem to bounce off the ceiling, God's mercy steps in. The lesson from the invalid is mercy is God's response to misery. Maybe you feel like you've been abandoned. You've tried to do everything you can think of, but nothing's worked. See, you're a perfect candidate for the mercy of God. When you are helpless and hopeless, God reaches out in mercy. See, mercy is available to you. Jesus didn't walk up to the man and say, you know what? You are going to be healed whether you like it or not. Jesus didn't force it. Jesus simply asked, do you want to be made well? See, God never forces his mercy on you. It must be received. Listen to me today. You can receive a miracle. If you've got a lot of faith, a little faith, or none at all. If you're hopeful or you're hopeless. If you're a convinced follower of Jesus, or if you're a doubter and a skeptic, today can be your day for a miracle. Listen to me. It's not up to you. There's not some kind of secret formula. It's God's power and his mercy at work. Listen, we've been praying for weeks that God will heal people as we pray together during this series. If you don't have faith for your healing, listen, I do. I've seen God heal. Matter of fact, God's healed me. Many of you don't know this, but since the age of 13, I'd been deaf in my left ear. Had about 10% healing, or 10% hearing. Everything sounded muffled. I'd constantly go, wait, what? I'd walk on the right side of people on their left so that I could listen to my good ear. And then one day, and can I tell you, I prayed from healing from the time I was 13 until the time that I was 26. And healing didn't come. And if I could confess to you, I wasn't sure God even wanted me to be healed. Sure, I was a pastor. I knew he could if he wanted, but I didn't think he would. We were in a service, and the pastor said, tonight I want to pray for people who've been dealing with long-term illness, and you've given up on ever getting a healing from God. I want you to come down. So I'm sitting there going, all right, God, is that me? Like, you know how whenever God tells you to respond and you fight it? Not you guys, just me? Okay. So I said, all right, God, I don't know. And then the speaker goes, no, look, get out of your seat and come down here. Don't bargain with God. Don't worry if I'm talking about you. I am. And I went, all right, let's go. Here we go. The dude said, all right, raise your hands. And I'm like, started praying for me. And I'm like, I'm not believing God to heal me. I know he can. And then I heard God said, if you'll believe, I will. And I went, God, I ain't got much faith. Help me in my unbelief. And all of a sudden, my ear popped. Can I tell you, it wasn't anything I said. It definitely wasn't anything I did, because I was just sitting here with this face on my face. I had such a bad attitude. Yet God, because of his grace and his mercy, healed me anyways. Here's the crazy thing. And it's documented that I was deaf. My last hearing test that I had in the military before I got out, my hearing in my left ear was better than perfect. You're like, well, Pastor, how can you have better than perfect hearing? I don't know. That's what the Army said. And that only happened because I chose to respond to an altar call for healing. It didn't have anything to do with me. It had everything to do with God. If you are faith-filled like Bartimaeus, we're going to pray for your healing. If you are hopeless and miserable and have no faith at all, like the invalid, we're going to pray and believe God will touch you. If you're a follower of Jesus, we're going to pray and ask God to heal you. If this is the first time you've ever stepped in a church, or you're a skeptic and a doubter of Jesus and God, we're going to pray for God to heal you. See, listen to me. Healing is here. Lord, I pray for you to heal people in this room today. God, I pray for people who are here in the room, God, that need a healing. But God, I also pray for people who are watching online today, God, or who come across this video in the future. Lord, I'm so grateful that your healing isn't confined to a building or time. God, that you can touch them right where they're at. So God, I pray for people this morning, God, that are dealing with long-term illnesses and long-term sicknesses, God, like I was. God, maybe they've been dealing with it for so long that they don't even think you can. Lord, they know you can, but they've given up all hope that you would ever heal them. God, we pray this morning that you would heal them in the name of Jesus. God, they've prayed so many times before, and nothing happened. God, I pray you do it. God, I pray for people who, God, maybe it's an acute pain. God, it's something that has come on all of a sudden. God, we know you can heal that just as much as you can heal long-term illness. So God, we ask you to do that today.